Great, good morning everyone and welcome to our virtual open day for Titanic Works. We normally do this in person, but sadly because of coronavirus this year we can't go down into the cellars. So I'm Natasha and I work at Wessex Archaeology and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator. And I've got Steph here, who you'll be able to see, from the Heritage team, and he's going to talk to you about Titanic Works.
Okay, so hello everyone and welcome. As you're doubtlessly aware, you're here today for a virtual tour of the Titanic Works Crucible Cellars on Hoyle Street, Sheffield. So I'll be doing a slightly slower walkthrough in a second of this, but this is to give a general idea of the space. Okay. So here we go. So this is from the entrance external staircase down into the cellar. You'll have to excuse my probably dodgy controls here. These are all available online as well, and we'll be sharing links so you can explore the cellars yourself. So as we said before, these are the ash pits below the firing holes. Firing holes are above here, and you can almost make out the iron gridwork above here, almost like a barbecue, if you will. So cold air would come in through here and feed the fires above, and as a result, these holes could be controlled individually for each melting hole. And the crucibles would have sat above here, beneath the shop floor above. This here was the possible ingot. A bit hard to see in this visualization, but you can believe me. The teeming pit would have sat above here. You can see this strange, the construction of the cellar is all very hodgepodge, you know, kind of making use of what was available and adapting to as needs be. So in the shop floor above, there would have been a pit, which would have been partially supported by this column here and extended slightly over. And the reason they're set below ground level is you can imagine the weight of a 10, 20 kilogram pot of molten steel, and pouring that is incredibly difficult. So if you can decrease the angle you're pouring at, it's far easier to get the necessary tip. And so the ingot would have, the mold would have sat in here and they'd have tipped from above. You can see again on the other side, it's mirrored or roughly mirrored. So you've got six ash pits, 2 vaults, both slightly different in form, but we believe it's all a single phase of construction. And then turning the corner, we have the slightly later pot shop addition with, this is a entirely modern ceiling above here, part of the student accommodation. So in here, there would have been a puddling tray, which would essentially be a large timber or metal tray in which the men would tread the clay to saturate it and make it malleable. Presumably this would have been a light well and or service hatch to get materials in to the pot shop, being below ground level. As I said, so cellar 1 was numbered as it was the first to be opened, rather than of any particular, there's no particular logic to it other than that. It was possibly the earliest cellar, however, as it may relate to the earliest iteration of the site, relating to the buildings shown on the 1850 Ordnance Survey mapping. At any rate, it had certainly been constructed by the late 19th century. The cellar differs markedly to the layout of cellar 2, comprising a single stack arrangement with 10 melting holes and corresponding ash pits. The interior of the cellar features 2 vaulted areas to the main cellar room, an external staircase, and again, a second smaller room which would likely have been used for the production of crucibles. The cellar is particularly interesting as for its subsequent use as an air raid shelter, as evidenced by remains of timber benching throughout the cellar set against the walls and the remains of a World War II chemical toilet. So Natasha, can you play the fly through for this one? So here is cellar 1, entered again from an external staircase. We come into this double vaulted space with an array of 10 ash pits to the side, which would have related to a single chimney stack above, unlike the former cellar we looked at, which had 6 pits to either side and 2 stacks, which is quite an unusual arrangement. Usually there's just a single stack. Of particular interest in here are the remains of these molds here for packing the fire pits, the firing holes, as I showed you earlier on. So these are timber and designed to perfectly fit within the firing holes above here. As you can see, they're elliptical as well. So they would be placed down, and clay and canister mix would be packed down around them, and that would protect the brickwork from the fire. Also, you can note in here is the cement render, and here remains of former benches from the Second World War, when this was used as a air raid shelter. Again, here would presumably have been a pot shop, again with a tray for the working of materials and secondary access for bringing in material. Again, you can see former bench along here with what was the chemical toilet to the rear here. Finally, the last cellar, cellar 3, is the latest of the group and dates to the early to mid 20th century. The cellar featured a single stack again with 12 melting holes, an ash pit and ash pits, and an external stair. Again, it has an ancillary pot shop to the west. At the time of survey, the melting holes in this building had been infilled, and the cellar had been repurposed for later use, perhaps as storage or similar. What is particularly notable with cellar 3 in comparison to the other two is that the chimney stacks design is different. Here it's a freestanding stack, whereas in the other buildings, the stack was incorporated into the rear wall of the buildings. In this regard, the cellar is similar to those surviving at the Abbeydale industrial hamlet on Abbeydale Road, which I mentioned earlier. So if you get to go there, you'll see a similar arrangement to the stacks. Presumably, part of this was to reduce the risk of fire. I guess you can separate the chimney structure from the rest of the building, and also that chimney would be undergoing extreme variations in heat. So if you can remove that stress from the fabric of the main building, it's probably a good thing. On this visualization, again, you can see teeming pits set beneath the floor. Within this building, the teeming pits are supported on columns within the space below. And as you can see, it's a single vault rather than double. Another nice feature within this cellar, possibly owing to its later date, is the retention of the puddling pit within the pot shop extension, which we'll see in a bit in the fly through. But it's a nice feature. Again, Sasha, do you want to play the playthrough? Okay, so the final cellar. Sorry for the clunkiness here. Okay, so this is the final cellar. Again, as I said, it's a single vault rather than double. You can see it's far wider. I mean, the construction is quite different, which is perhaps unsurprising as it's far later in date. Also just shows the variation possible within the cellars. Here, the ash pits have all been blocked up. I said, here's the teeming pit. You can see a metal box basically sunken in the ground above, supported by a column within the space. Whereas in the other cellars, it seemed to be supported by the intersection of the two vaults. which I guess why this and another teeming pit there. Oops, a daisy. Oh, you can see these what appear to be circular features in each of the visualizations is simply where the machines, which Jack will describe shortly, were situated. So not a real feature. So this is the pot shop, and you can see here the metal puddling tray completely intact, occupies almost the entire space. You know, it's quite a large space. You can get a few men in there, work quite a lot of clay. And here you've got intact worktop, I guess where pots would have been shaped. These here are, I guess, have been stored down here later on and just left. These are former grindstones from memory. And again, you've got storage and access and a modern ceiling where the student accommodation has been constructed above. And finally, you can see here the freestanding nature of the chimney stack. Ooh, if I don't go through the wall. So yeah, freestanding with a separate wall behind supporting the building. Okay, and that should conclude the tours.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. We hope you've enjoyed the Titanic Works webinar.